We interrupt this program with news that is just breaking. This is a moment that could change the world forever. Reports are flooding in from sources in Eastern Europe. They speak of an incident over the Baltic Sea, an incident involving the Russian presidential aircraft, Ilyushin Il-96-300 PU, and fighter jets from the United States Air Force. The details are still murky, the information is coming in fast, but what we are hearing is almost too shocking to comprehend. We must stress these are early reports. We are working to confirm them with officials. But the story, as it stands now, is one of global significance. The initial alerts lit up screens at the Pentagon, at NATO headquarters in Brussels, and right here in our newsroom, a flash bulletin, an urgent message. It said there was an air-to-air engagement over international waters. This is military language. It means planes have interacted in a hostile way. The world is now watching and waiting. The Russian presidential plane, known as Board 1, is no ordinary aircraft. It is a flying command center. It is a symbol of Russian power and authority. On board, we are told, was President Vladimir Putin. He was returning from a routine inspection in Kaliningrad. Now that plane is gone. It has vanished from radar screens. How could this have happened? That is the question on everyone's mind. The answer, it seems, lies in a deadly combination of high tensions, close proximity, a split-second decision. The Baltic Sea has long been a flashpoint. It is a narrow body of water where NATO and Russian forces operate dangerously close to one another. For years there have been near misses, Russian jets buzzing United States warships, NATO planes shadowing Russian bombers. It was a Cold War dance, a set of unwritten rules. But today, September 2nd, 2025, the music stopped. The rules were broken. The incident began as a routine escort mission. 2 United States F-35 Lightning II jets were on patrol. They were operating out of a NATO base in Poland. Their mission was to monitor Russian air activity near Allied airspace. They picked up President Putin's Il-96 and its Sukhoi Su-35 escorts on their long-range sensors. The escalation happened with breathtaking speed. The world changed in that instant. The news of the shootdown did not just break, it shattered. It sent shockwaves across the entire planet. Global financial markets reacted with pure panic. The Dow, the FTSE. The Nikkei trading was halted on major exchanges to prevent a total collapse. The price of oil skyrocketed. Gold, the traditional safe haven in times of crisis, soared to historic highs. This was not just a political crisis or a military crisis, it was an immediate and catastrophic economic crisis. In Moscow, the initial silence gave way to a carefully orchestrated show of fury and grief. State television channels switched to solemn music and images of the Russian flag. An emergency broadcast featured the Minister of Defense. His face was grim, his voice trembling with rage. He confirmed the death of the president. He called it a monstrous act of unprovoked aggression by the United States. He declared that Russia's armed forces were being placed on their highest level of combat alert. This included their strategic nuclear forces. The message was unambiguous. This was an act of war. Russia would respond. The United Nations headquarters in New York became the epicenter of diplomatic panic. For over 2 decades, he had been the central pillar of the entire system. His authority was absolute, his power was personal. Now that pillar was gone. The Constitution stipulated a clear line of succession. The Prime Minister was to become acting president, but the reality was far more complex. The system was not built on laws, but on loyalty and fear. A fierce and hidden power struggle erupted almost immediately within the walls of the Kremlin. The world could not see it, but it could feel the tremors. The key players were the so-called Siloviki, the men from the security and military services. They were the true holders of power. Head of the FSB, Minister of Defense, Secretary of the Security Council. These were hardliners. They had spent their careers viewing the West as an enemy. They saw this incident not as a tragic accident, but as a deliberate decapitation strike. They gathered in secret meetings. They debated their next move. Should they follow the Constitution, or seize power directly to ensure stability and avenge their fallen leader? The future of Russia hung in the balance. For the average Russian citizen, the news was a source of profound fear and confusion. Now that stability was shattered. Deep beneath the West Wing, the White House Situation Room was a scene of, well, controlled tension. The President of the United States sat at the head of the long table, surrounded by his top advisors. The Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Director of the CIA. Their faces were etched with worry. On the large screens that lined the walls, they watched the world react in real time. They saw the markets crashing, Russian military alerts, and protests erupting. The weight of the moment was just immense. Every word spoken in this room could lead to either peace or, global annihilation. The first priority was to establish the facts. What exactly happened over the Baltic? The president listened intently as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs played the audio from the F-35 cockpit. He reviewed the radar data. He heard the American pilot's frantic report after the missile was fired. The evidence pointed to a tragic error under extreme duress, not a premeditated act of aggression. It was a dual message, an olive branch but backed by a sword. He was reaching out a hand for peace, but also making it clear that the United States was ready to defend itself and its allies if necessary. The world waited to hear his words. In a small apartment in St. Petersburg, a history teacher named Anya Petrova watched the news with her family. The face of the defense minister on the screen was a mask of cold fury. He spoke of betrayal and revenge. Anya held her son's hand tightly. He was 19 years old. He was of military age. For years, the wars on television had felt distant, something that happened to other people in other places. Now, war felt terrifyingly close. It felt like it was in their living room. She looked at her son, at his youthful face, and felt a cold dread wash over her. She prayed for peace but feared her prayers would go unanswered. Major David Falcon Chen, the F-35 pilot, sat in a debriefing room at a secure NATO airbase. He was physically unharmed, but his mind was in turmoil. He kept replaying the final moments in his head, the blare of the warning system, the aggressive posture of the Russian Su-35, the split-second decision to fire. He had followed his training, he had acted to defend himself and his wingman, but the result was a catastrophe. He had not intended to hit the passenger plane. He felt a profound sense of regret, a heavy weight on his soul. He was a soldier, trained for combat, but he was also a human being. He knew his life, and the world, would never be the same again. In Brussels, a senior European diplomat named Isabelle Dubois worked the phones relentlessly. Before the first missile could be launched, the first war was already underway. It was a war fought in silence. Through fiber optic cables, satellite links, it was the war of cyber attacks. Within an hour of the shootdown, a massive wave of digital assaults was unleashed from Russia. It was coordinated and devastating. The targets were not military, at least not at first. The targets were the foundations of American civil society, to create chaos, to paralyze the country, to show that Russia could inflict immense pain without firing a single shot. The digital Pearl Harbor that experts had warned about for years was finally here. The New York Stock Exchange was hit first. Its systems were overwhelmed by a massive distributed denial of service attack. Trading was impossible. The entire United States financial system was frozen. Then came the power grids. Substations in major cities from California to Maine were targeted. The lights began to go out. Traffic signals failed. Hospitals switched to emergency generators. United States Cyber Command, operating from Fort Meade in Maryland, immediately went on the offensive. They had been preparing for this scenario for years. They launched their own counterattacks. Their targets were the command and control systems of the Russian military. It was a high-stakes game of digital chess. The immediate economic impact was swift and brutal. It was a global financial heart attack. As Russia and the West imposed sanctions on each other, the global supply chain, already fragile, completely fractured. Russia, a major supplier of oil gas wheat, turned off the taps to Europe. Energy prices, which had already spiked, went to unimaginable levels. In Europe, governments were forced to ration electricity heating fuel, factories shut down, businesses went bankrupt. The economic pain was immediate and widespread, affecting every single citizen. The United States and its allies responded with what they called economic warfare. They completely cut off Russia from the global financial system. They froze all Russian state assets held abroad, a sum totaling hundreds of billions of dollars. They banned all trade with Russia. Major corporations that had operated in Russia for decades were forced to abandon their investments and pull out. The Russian economy, heavily dependent on its exports, was sent into a tailspin. The ruble became worthless. The Russian people saw their savings wiped out overnight. The economic weapons were just as destructive as the military ones. The crisis was not contained to Russia and the West. The entire world suffered. Developing nations that depended on Russian wheat fertilizer faced the prospect of famine. The interconnected world had become an interconnected crisis. The world now stands at a terrifying crossroads. Down one path lies total war. A direct military conflict between Russia and NATO. This is the path of nightmares. It is a path that could lead to the use of nuclear weapons, a prospect that has haunted humanity for 80 years. It would be a war with no winners, only survivors, a war that would leave the planet scarred and broken, a final, tragic end to the story of human civilization. Down another path lies a fragile and uncertain peace. This path is navigated by the diplomats. They are working tirelessly behind the scenes to find a way out. They are proposing off-ramps, de-escalation measures, a summit between the new Russian leadership and the United States president on neutral ground, perhaps in Geneva. They argue that even in the darkest of times, communication is essential. There is also a third path, a path that leads to something entirely new and unexpected. The old world order, dominated by a single superpower, is clearly over. This crisis has shattered it. What will replace it? Perhaps a new, more chaotic multipolar world. The future is unwritten. The fate of our world depends on it.